Hi everyone, my name is Jeannine Mitchell. I serve on Doylestown Township's Environmental Advisory Council, also known as the EAC. I've been a member of the EAC for 4 years now, and I've been serving as the Township's Birdtown Coordinator since I joined the EAC, which is something I really enjoy. I love plants and gardening and native birds, so this is right up my alley. One of the things I used to do when I was working was to teach English. When I retired from teaching, I spent a little while trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I wasn't a science teacher, I was a high school English teacher. But I love the natural world, so once I figured it out and I saw that there was an opening on the Township's EAC, I applied for it. Eventually I got on the council, and now I've been enjoying my retirement so much more because I'm involved with my community, and I found a special project. This is my special project. This is a native plant demonstration garden. Why native plants? Well, Pennsylvania bird towns are especially devoted to helping to establish and restore habitat for native songbirds. Habitat is really important not only to songbirds but to butterflies and pollinators and all kinds of wildlife. Habitat has been degraded during the last few decades, and one of the things we're trying to do through Birdtown is to get habitat restored one backyard at a time. How do we do that? Well, we have to teach people, residents, about the beauty and the value of native plant species. So about 3 years ago, we decided to build a native plant demonstration garden that could be used as an educational tool so that residents can learn about native plants. We broke ground for this garden in 2014, in March of 2014. We had about 25 volunteers come and break ground and clear away vines and low branches and invasive shrubs so that we could create a site. So this is the native plant demonstration garden into its 3rd year. This part of Central Park is called the Environmental Education Center. There's a little classroom over there, and this is a bird blind which has been here for quite a long time. We chose this site because it's already the Environmental Education Center in Central Park. The bird blind was sited in a lovely spot, but there wasn't much in the way of bird life or pollinator or butterfly life because we needed more native plants. So that's one reason we chose this site. We began the project by clearing vines, invasive multiflora rose, a couple of non-native trees we had to take out, and then we had a work day that involved digging this site, which is about 1,000 square feet. We had to dig but not rototill. What we decided to do is a more environmentally friendly way of starting a new garden, and we hope to model this for residents as well. How does it work? It's called the lasagna method of creating a brand new garden on a site like this. What we had to do was to get rid of the invasive stuff and the junky vines and low branches. And then we covered the site with layers of newspaper, and we also got rolls of unused newsprint paper, laid it out, and on top of it we put several inches of composted leaf mulch. Our township is enormously supportive of this project. All of the composted leaf mulch came from the township's supply because they do compost in a big way. So we began by spreading 33 cubic yards of composted leaf mulch on top of newspaper. That allowed the existing plant material that we couldn't dig out or it was just too small to dig out to begin to decompose under the newsprint, which darkened the area, and then under the mulch, which then encouraged the vegetation to start decomposing. So what we have here now is beautiful soil for these plants that we've put in over the last 2 years. When I first designed this garden, I sat down and found what I thought would thrive in this site, which is partly sunny, partly shady. Some areas are very shady. And I began to look at shrubs that would produce seeds and berries for the birds, herbaceous perennials, which would provide nectar for butterflies and pollinators, and beauty and low maintenance. Also, I was thinking about the deer and the rabbits and the groundhogs, which of course are abundant in this part of Bucks County. So I designed a garden around those requirements. Of course, what we have here isn't exactly my design. Why is that? Well, we needed to get plants. We had to buy plants. We had to get donated plants, and we're still in the process of that. This is August of 2016, so we're into our 3rd year. Some of the plants that are here were donated, and some we purchased. But what's here is a beautiful collection, some shrubs, and mostly herbaceous perennials so far. This is an example of a native plant that I would love to see more of our residents install on their properties. It's a native vine called trumpet honeysuckle or coral honeysuckle, Lonicera sempervirens. This is a hummingbird magnet. If this plant were getting a little more sun, it would be loaded with flowers right now. It begins flowering about late April, early May, and continues to flower right through October and the first frost. This is an awesome native vine. It's not trumpet vine. Be very careful. We don't want trumpet vine. It's terribly invasive. But we do want trumpet honeysuckle. This area of the garden has some plants that are now 2 years old. We have begun the signage of the plants so that people can walk through and learn and identify the native plants. This is an example. This is golden ragwort, which is thriving. This is a wonderful ground cover. It blooms yellow in April and May, and then it becomes an evergreen ground cover. Native plant, very popular with the pollinators early in the season when they're just starting to collect pollen. This is another plant that we put in 2 years ago. It's a variety of celandine poppy. Again, you can see that we're putting some signs up. These are temporary signs. When we have the money, I'd like to get some nice signage, and I'd also like someday to coordinate the list of plants in this garden with our website so that people could go on the website, see a photo, identify the plant, and say, I want that in my yard, and be able to use this as a real education center. Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve in Washington Crossing is a great source for native plants. There are some native nurseries around. One of my favorites is Gino's nursery in Wrightstown. It's right on 2nd Street Pike, Route 232. He's a native plant nursery. It's a small family operation. It's wonderful, and his prices are reasonable. Some of these plants have come from there. Some of these plants have come from a place called Arch Wild in Quakertown, another native plant specialty nursery. They deal mostly in large-scale plantings like this one. We bought 500 plugs from Arch Wild, for example. That was an adventure. We put 500 plants in April of this year, and many of them are thriving. They'll begin blooming next year. So this garden, like all gardens in this area, will sustain some deer browse and some other damage from animals. This, for example, is a great example. These were beautiful about a week ago. This is a native sunflower. They were really pretty. Well, look, deer have come through and eaten all the flowers. They like flowers. But they don't eat everything. So some special considerations when choosing plants for a native garden will be finding and identifying plants that your deer will not eat. I don't believe that all deer like all the same things, just like all people don't like all the same things. Our deer clearly like native sunflower. We have to choose plants that maybe they don't like. For example, this stand of wild bergamot isn't touched by the deer. Well, why not? It's because it's a member of the mint family. They don't like that strong smell. At least these deer don't seem to like the strong smell of wild bergamot. These are just starting to bud up. We'll walk around later and get a good shot of what that flower looks like. But that's pretty well protected from deer and even other wildlife. Many of the plants that we installed in April will get moved around this garden. We have to start somewhere, so we have baby plants. Once they get mature and once they start seeding, we'll be able to move plants around the garden, and I think that it would be a good experiment to put some of this sunflower in the middle of the wild bergamot, and let's see what happens. Gardening is always an adventure, and it's always an experiment. This garden is no exception. This garden is pretty well drained, which means that it doesn't get wet. But when it doesn't rain, we do have to water this garden. One of the things we had to invest in was a commercial grade hose and reel. We can connect the hose to the water fountain, which is on the other side of the outdoor classroom. We reel out the hose and we can water this in a half an hour. It's just pretty easy to water it. But when you do install a new garden, for the first couple of years you do have to watch out that it is getting enough moisture. After about 3 years, though, many native plants will thrive with almost zero attention. Of course, you'll weed out some of what you don't want. In very dry conditions, you might want to water. But this garden, in another couple of years, will be almost maintenance-free. We don't use any fertilizer. What we have is mulch, fabulous mulch. We just keep mulching and mulching. It keeps the weeds down, and it also keeps the moisture in. Mulch also breaks down and creates some natural nutrients for these plants. We don't have to add any fertilizers at all. No pesticides either. Of course, we would never use a pesticide. Once you start killing one insect, you're killing all of the insects. So we don't do that. We're welcoming pollinators, insects, butterflies, birds. That's the point of the garden. This is a lesson in restoring habitat. What that really means is that we're creating an ecosystem. So when I say that we're planting for pollinators, butterflies, and birds, this is what I mean. One of the great books about native plants is Doug Tallamy's Bringing Nature Home. It's a great book. The bulk of his book is about what he calls insect biomass. What does that mean? It means not only the insects, including butterflies, it includes their eggs, the beginning larvae, the full-scale caterpillars, and the insects themselves, the butterflies, the moths, which is then all lumped together under this term insect biomass, which is food. I'm not interested in eating any of that, but birds, oh my goodness, they thrive on insect biomass. As a matter of fact, nesting birds, once they start feeding their young, require a great deal of protein for the babies. The baby birds are developing beaks and feet and bones. All of that needs a high protein diet. The bird seed that you and I put in our backyard feeders is not filled with protein. What is? Insect biomass. So when we welcome insects, pollinators, spiders, all of that into our native gardens, we're feeding the birds. The basin, which is a beautiful water feature here in Central Park, is loaded with birds year-round. During the migration, which begins around April, the spring migration brings a lot of birds like red-winged blackbirds into this basin area. They nest here in the reeds, in the cattails. This garden and the plants around this basin feed the red-winged blackbirds, the green herons, the eastern bluebirds that we see around this basin. So our native plant garden is a lesson in feeding the birds naturally. We decided to connect the outdoor classroom with the bird blind and the native plant demonstration garden with a path. I designed the path to be a meandering walk into the garden and through the garden. We were able to get the help of Davis Butala, who was looking for his Eagle Scout project. Davis gathered the materials, he gathered volunteer labor, and he created this lovely, natural walkway through the garden. You can see that it meanders. It's really a visual connection between that classroom, the garden, and the bird blind. When all of this is filled with plant material, and it might take a few more years for that to happen. Oh look, it's Jack in the Pulpit. I love Jack in the Pulpit. I'd like to have some of that in my shady area of my garden. White turtlehead, what a weird name. White turtlehead is a magnet for certain species of butterflies, and it blooms in late summer and early fall. When someone walks the path and sees this blooming in September, she might say, "Oh, I'd like to have that in my garden." How would she see it? By walking the path. How would she know what it is? By the signage. So ultimately this is going to be a nice teaching tool. And as you can see, we can follow the path out to the bird blind. It's a nice little walk. These ostrich ferns are an interesting addition to a native garden. They don't bloom. They come up as beautiful fiddleheads in April. They brown out by September and October. They disappear and then they come back up in the spring. They're a beautiful foundation planting. Although they don't provide seeds or berries or flowers, they're great hiding places for other kinds of wildlife. Toads, garter snakes. Oh, what's the value of a garter snake in a garden? I call a garter snake a garden assistant. They help to keep the rodent population down, and they can hide easily among such plants as ostrich ferns. The rodent population can be a little destructive to a garden. They too will eat low berries, low seeds. I have a feeling that some of these jack-in-the-pulpits have been attacked by maybe mice, maybe not, maybe it was a groundhog. But rodents are food for hawks, which makes them valuable for the native bird population, but they can be a little destructive in a garden. We put in, 2 years ago, some celandine poppy, nice early flowering native wildflower, right in here. These toothed-leaved plants along here. They're already spreading. That's the beauty of native plants as well. They start to multiply, and you can share them with your friends, your family, or you can move them around your garden. Look at this. We didn't put this celandine poppy in. It volunteered right there on the other side of the path. We're thrilled. I'm thrilled because it's ready to bloom. Again, this is one of those rebloomers. It starts in April, but it'll bloom off and on all. We're inside the bird blind. This is a great place to observe birds. Once the garden starts to get more mature, and we have a water feature out here, and maybe even a squirrel-proof bird feeder, this area will be richer in birds than it ever has been. The bird blind is a great place to come in and sit quietly, stand quietly, let the birds come in, start to identify them, teach your children, and enjoy the natural habitat and the beauty that we have here in Bucks County. This is a great spot to contemplate the ecosystem and to realize that birds are an excellent indicator of the health of an environment. Pennsylvania bird towns are really all about. This is an example of the ecosystem at work. These are some of the native sunflowers, and notice that they are surrounded by the wild bergamot. So it looks like the deer didn't come in here to eat these flowers. And right inside that flower are two beetles. I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're welcome to be here. They're good food for the birds. Thank you, beetles, for being here. All around you can see some wild bergamot that has finished blooming, but down here you'll see one that's blooming. It's a pretty lavender, looks great with the sunflower next to it. This is a companion planting that you can do in your own backyard and provide, as I said, some habitat. This is thrilling. This is native Joe Pye weed. Unfortunate name, weed. No, this is not a weed. This is a valuable late summer native wildflower. It's popular with butterflies and pollinators, and it's pretty. It's a great plant to put next to whatever you have that's yellow or whatever you like. But I'm thrilled that it's blooming, and because it is blooming, we know that it's happy here, and we'll add some next year. There are a lot of plants that have the word weed in their name. Butterfly weed, Joe Pye weed, two examples. But you know what a weed is? It's just something that is probably common and that you don't want in your garden. We have some Canada thistle in this garden. We have to keep taking it out. It's an undesirable plant, and I'll call that a weed, because it competes with the more desirable plants. It shades them out. It has a root system that competes with other more desirable plants. So what's a weed? It's what you don't want in your garden. And so you pull them out. But of course you're not using terrible chemicals. You know, if you just dig it out and put it on your compost pile, you're getting rid of your so-called weeds. But let's be careful about what we call a weed.